It's a great honor for me to welcome you today to the 30th Annual Presidential Lecture. What an important anniversary we have to celebrate. And first, I want to start by thanking the JBM Trio for that truly amazing prelude. Let's thank them once again. I think they've set the stage for an engaging and inspiring lecture, and it is especially wonderful to enjoy the talents of our School of Music students. You show us that despite the challenges the school continues to face due to the flood of 2008, you remain dedicated to developing your extraordinary talents and, of course, sharing them generously with all of us. We're very excited that we're moving forward on an incredible new downtown facility for the School of Music, so stay tuned. That's coming. President James O. Friedman established the Presidential Lecture Series 30 years ago. This event not only showcases some of our many outstanding faculty members, but it also serves to encourage communication across disciplinary boundaries. As well, the lecture brings the tremendous work of our faculty scholars to the general public. For 3 decades, through this forum, we've proudly shared our excellence in areas ranging from mathematics to physics and astronomy, to the health sciences, to literature, to music, to law. I'm very pleased today to introduce to you our 30th presidential lecturer, Sara Rynes-Weller, John F. Murray, Professor of Management and Organization in the Tippie College of Business. Professor Rynes-Weller is known widely for her research and teaching in organizational change, how important it is for businesses, and why so many struggle with it. And today, we'll enjoy some of the fruits of this very innovative and forward-thinking mind. Your program lists many of Sara's accomplishments in her biography, and I won't repeat those. But even that accounting of an extraordinary career can't capture the true character of this superb teacher and scholar. So let me share with you a few more insights from some of her students and colleagues. Sara's colleague and current departmental executive officer, Jay Christensen Solansky, remarks upon her well-rounded excellence as a faculty member. He very much admires, and this is a quote, her dedication to all 3 roles of a faculty member. She's passionate about doing research and making it relevant to practitioners. She's very conscientious about her teaching and is continually looking for ways to improve it. She's always a willing person to take on service responsibilities. She is a reliable mentor for graduate students and junior faculty. Her departmental colleague, Ken Brown, calls her a fantastic mentor and friend. That sounds like Ken. And seems to have some special insight into that conscientiousness Jay mentioned. Ken says, and this is a quote, when working on a paper, Sara can often start and finish the actual writing in 24 hours. I remember a time when I had a question from her at 4 p.m., something she needed to get started. I answered right away, and the paper was waiting in my inbox the next morning when I checked at 7 a.m. She had sent it about 4 a.m., and to make me feel even worse, it was incredibly well written. Ken is just as admiring of Sara's insight and generosity. He says that when he first sent her a paper and asked for feedback, she returned it within a day or so and offered truly useful insights. Most interesting to me were places where she would suggest deleting a couple of words and changing one, and my mediocre prose started to sound like poetry. Both Jay and Ken have mentioned Sara's incredible mentoring abilities. Someone who can attest to that is a former graduate student, Christine Quinn Trank, now at Vanderbilt University. Chris says, quote, Sara has been an extraordinary mentor to so many students and researchers in our field. I think it's safe to say that Sara has a soft spot for the iconoclast, the outsider, the colorers outside the lines. When she was editor of Academy of Management Journal, the top empirical outlet in our field, she cleared the way for researchers exploring non-traditional contexts and using conventional methods. What I personally know best is Sara's advocacy for students who didn't quite follow the conventional wisdom or who were asking questions that could not be answered with our field's standard methods. Sara is also incredibly supportive of her colleagues and students on a very personal level. and that often seems to combine with her love of animals, especially dogs. Sarah's departmental colleague, Nancy Hauserman, says, quote, she sends cards to everyone who does wonderful things in the department, college, and her colleagues around the world. She is the ultimate funny/wonderful gift giver to friends and colleagues. One of her current doctoral students, Andrew Hosmanic, has experienced this phenomenon. Andrew says, what stands out for me is Professor Ryan's love of animals and the funny things they do. Many times I've had my spirits brightened by a good email from her featuring a video of singing dogs or pictures of cute puppies. And she gives me the best cards after milestones like comps or presentations, always featuring cats doing something funny or adorable dogs. Jay Christensen Solansky does mention one thing that gives us insight to just how much Sara is a huge dog lover, as Nancy Hauserman says. Jay says she loves dogs and can always find humor in their behavior, even when their actions result in her having to be treated in the emergency room. So I doubt there will be any cute pictures or videos of dogs and puppies in the lecture today, but with Sara, you never know. She's here to enlighten us about leading in the new wave of change, and I'm sure that her presentation will not only inform us, but also surprise us. I'm honored to introduce this year's presidential lecturer. Please welcome Sara Rynes-Weller.
Thank you so much, Sally, for that wonderful introduction. And for those of you who talked to Sally about me, that's so touching, and I'm so happy. Thank you to all of you for coming. I'm so excited to see that there are so many people who are interested in the topic of change. When I was remarking or thinking over this talk this weekend, the phrase came to mind from Hillary Clinton that it takes a village to write a presidential lecture. And I'm not really sure if it takes or requires a village to write a presidential lecture, because I think if, for example, the topic were nuclear physics, there probably wouldn't be enough citizens who would be informed to send tips off to the lecturer and help the lecture along. But really, this lecture, there are dozens of you out in the audience, literally, who have had some impact on this lecture. And it's just, I want to especially thank you. Some of you know very directly how you contributed to this lecture. You either listened to early versions of the lecture, you had coffee with me while I was trying to think through a particularly thorny point. You might have been on a yoga retreat with me recently where some of the inspirations that people had seemed very germane to the issues of leadership and change. And some of you who might only see this on the internet, like Chris Quinn-Trank, who wanted to be here but got caught in the storm this week. I hope that when you listen to the lecture, you will see yourselves in this lecture. So I think part of why people have been able to participate so much is that I have these great colleagues and these great friends. But I think it's also partly the topic of organizational change. And change in general is something that everyone is going through, everyone has experienced, everyone has opinions about it, everyone has some knowledge about it, everyone has strong emotions about particularly certain kinds of change. And so it's really easy for people to participate and give ideas and send stories and send pictures about change because it's very engaging. We've all seen horrible failures of organizations to change that have tremendously negative consequences for their employees and their customers. And at the same time, we've seen other organizations that have managed to do exceptionally excellent turnarounds or profound things even when they weren't in a crisis situation. So today what I'm hoping to do is to, after mentioning a few things that can go wrong, to get to the point where we look at what organizations do when they become resilient, when they really become prepared to face the future no matter what the fast-moving environment brings us. So change is really nothing new. This is Heraclitus, or the best that we know of what he looked like 2,500 years ago. He said, the only thing constant is change. At the same time, I think everyone in this room probably feels that we are in a time of change that is different from what has preceded us. That change is no longer as likely to be slow, to be linear. Change is more likely to be disruptive, discontinuous, multiplicative, exponential, not linear, and not slow. So let me just give a couple of examples. This is the symbol of the United States Postal Service. This is an organization that is entering its 238th year. It's an organization that I think most Americans have a positive feeling towards, certainly did when I was growing up. People know their postmaster or postmistress. They know the person who delivers their mail. The price has always been right. People had a great affinity for the mail, and companies like Hallmark and so forth have made a great art form. And I guess people mentioned I do like cards, and I pay a lot of attention to what they say and what the pictures on them are. And so mail has always been a really special thing to a lot of people. It's certainly been a special thing to me. But the U.S. Postal Service is running up against what many, many businesses are running up against, and that is the intrusion of wave after wave of what we call disruptive innovation. Things that start out that are inferior to the mail service, that are not as eloquent, that are not as permanent, that are not as legally binding, but over time they improve themselves, they attain legal status, they improve their fonts, they improve their graphics, and all of a sudden the U.S. Postal Service finds itself with a much smaller market share. Some examples: electronic mail. When you first started sending electronic mail, it's true that it had the advantage of being incredibly fast, but the fonts were ugly. It didn't have legal status. If you sent a Valentine to your sweetie on email, that was not a good thing to do. Then we had America Online's Instant Messenger, and again, a lot of businesses kind of snoozed. The Postal Service snoozed. Who used Instant Messenger? Our kids. You know, nobody thought of making money off of Instant Messenger right away. It wasn't really viewed as a threat to the Postal Service. And then that was followed up with texting on cell phones. You know, texting wasn't really something that cell phone manufacturers thought was going to be a big feature of cell phones. They expected cell phones to be used pretty much the same way that rotary phones were used. Those of you who are young in the audience, when you leave, you can ask your parents what a rotary phone is. But in fact, the crowd started to figure out what they could do with these cell phones, and all of a sudden you have people texting messages all over the world. And again, it's not quite as nice as email even. It's not as nice as sitting at a computer. It's not as nice as writing a letter, but it's very, very quick. Then you have Facebook. All of a sudden, if I wanted to, and I don't, I could put my personal Christmas letter on Facebook for, well, depending on what kinds of blocks I put on my page, maybe for millions to see. And then we have Skype, where you can get on, and for either free or very inexpensively, you can talk to your relatives in Australia, in Austria. And so all of these things definitely cut into the U.S. mail service, and it's very typical of what's happening in other industries as well. Think about internet shopping. So the U.S. Postal Service, a lot of its business was sending catalogs. Now, a lot of people don't want catalogs. They go online to look at products. Then when they find products, certain types of products like movies, music, instead of ordering a physical product, they simply download the product. And all of this has caused the United States Postal Service to be at a point where it's facing questions of whether or how it can go on. Here's another example, Amazon.com. This is a company that's less than 20 years old, And it illustrates the fact that if you have a business right now, or even maybe a nonprofit, it's very, very difficult now to know who your competitors are. What is your industry? Where are the boundaries of your industry and your competition or your potential collaborators? Where do they end? So when Amazon first started, the major threat that it posed were to bricks and mortar bookstores like our beloved Prairie Lights here in Iowa City. But as time went on, Amazon has become a threat or a competitor to virtually every brick and mortar retail outlet. And in addition, it's become a competitor of a lot of other online shopping sites as well. Now, Amazon is also in competition with Google. We think about Google as an online search engine, but Amazon and Google are duking it out in the arena of cloud storage, and they're expected to duke it out in the area of big data processing. And meanwhile, we look at Google, we think about it as a search engine, but they're working on driverless cars. So all of this gives you a flavor of just how quickly things are shifting. In higher education itself, you may be familiar with this quote by the president of Stanford University. It's less than a year old. He said, "There's a tsunami coming in higher education." He said, "I don't know where it's going, but I'd rather be riding the wave than be flattened by it." Now, and Forbes, U.S. News and World Report just a couple of years ago said if higher education were a business, it would be ripe for a hostile takeover. Now, higher education is undergoing the possibility of massive disruption. The major thing that people are thinking of as the massive disruption is online education. The fact that teachers and learners need not be co-located in the same physical space, nor do they have to be located online at the same point in time. So the material can be put out there for the student. The student can come in and look at the material at any time, so not co-located in time or geographical space. Now, we've had this for really quite some time, and it hasn't posed a big threat to the high-quality universities. Certainly, companies like the University of Phoenix do have a large following, but they've never really made a dent in universities like the University of Iowa. What's different about online learning now, in the last year, there have been at least 3 major, either for-profit or nonprofit, online organizations that have been started that have the cooperation or literally the founding of some of the major universities in this country, such as Stanford or MIT. And they're allying with a lot of other good universities in the United States to provide online education. Some of these courses have had more than 100,000 people watching these courses online from all over the world. There are stories about how students from all over the world are helping students in countries where all of a sudden YouTube goes down or their government censors the internet, and how these other students work to get them the lectures that they're missing because of technological glitches. So this is really a different environment now. And you put this on top of the fact that there are a lot of cost pressures in higher education. There are a lot of time pressures in higher education. A lot of people want it cheaper and faster. And also, employers, there's a lot more pressure. When employers really want to hire people that they know have certain capabilities and skills. So there's a lot more pressure on universities to demonstrate that students are truly learning the materials. So you put all that together, and we really could be on the cusp of disruptive change. I think we are in higher education. So given that, what can we learn from all the other high-quality, high-service companies, mainly in the United States, I'll use the examples, but those who have gone through disruptive change, some of which have succeeded, some of which have completely failed, and some of which who failed and managed to pull themselves out of crisis. So let's start there. So let's take a look at these companies. These are all companies that were highly regarded companies, known as producing a high level of quality in products or their services, and they all were affected by disruptive change. Circuit City had a very high-quality electronic sales business, but they were disrupted by or failed to kind of see the onset of lower-priced competitors like Best Buy, and then after that, the ability of people to buy electronics on the internet after having access to much better information about what were the best products to buy. Polaroid and Kodak were both very slow to get in on the digital revolution in photography, despite the fact that Kodak invented a lot of the underlying technology that later disrupted its company. Rolex and other Swiss quartz movement watches, the Swiss invented the digital watch technology, but they thought it was so inferior to those beautiful, elegant quartz movement Swiss watches that they took their digital technology to watch shows and didn't even bother to patent it. So Japanese firms like Casio were there, and the rest is history. The share of the Swiss in the watch market, they're still there, but it's a much, much lower market share. IBM hung with its very profitable mainframe computers long beyond the point where mainframes were the future of computing. So while individuals were shifting to personal computing, companies were shifting to much smaller network computers, IBM kept hanging on to the mainframe because it was so profitable and had so much service connected with it from which they made profits. Think about General Motors. General Motors certainly knew about Honda and Toyota, although honestly, their executives were so isolated and insulated in Detroit, and in Detroit there were so few foreign autos that they really might not have seen very many Toyotas or Hondas, but they did know about them, but they just considered them completely inferior to Cadillacs and Lincolns, and the cars that they were manufacturing that not coincidentally had very large profit margins for not much more expense to build. And they knew after some of the gasoline crises in the early 70s that they needed to produce small cars. So they actually created an alliance with Toyota in one of their former plants, General Motors did, in one of their former plants in Fremont, California, that had manufactured cars and had been shut down due, among other things, to very serious union management relationship problems. They reopened with a union workforce, but with guidance from the Toyota management. And the only reason GM wanted that was to produce a small car. They didn't know how to produce a small car anymore, a profitable small car. They had the whole Toyota production system sitting right there in front of them, and they didn't care. They didn't know that that was the real value of the whole thing, despite the fact that they had managers that were trying to catch their attention and say, this is a way better system than what we've been doing here. But they just couldn't get through. So, essentially what was going on here was these companies were on autopilot for a really long time. They were on autopilot, milking profits from their most profitable, highest quality lines, while they were not taking enough notice, while they were watching profits and share price for the stockholders. They were not watching what was happening to market share, what was happening to customer loyalty, or what was happening to employee loyalty, for that matter. And we now know that those are all harbingers of what's going to happen to a company in the future, what their customers think and whether their employees are really engaged and feel that they're being treated fairly. So most of these companies, well, all of these companies, rode it out too long, and then they hit the point of crisis. Now, crisis is a very interesting issue in organizational change. There is no question that crisis provides great opportunities for organizations. You think about the 2008 financial crisis, it was a great opportunity for Congress and the President to get people to rethink their positions, to budge from very staunch lines, to really feel there was a crisis, that they had to move forward, that they could not act the way that they had always acted. So crisis presents a big opportunity. But on the other hand, what many people don't realize is crisis, by the time you let your business or your organization get into crisis, you're also in great danger. Because organizations can't stay in crisis forever and do well. When an organization is in crisis for too long, people get depressed, people get fearful. When people get fearful, the lower part of their brain, the most primitive parts of their brain take over. They want to fight. They're afraid. They want to deny. They want to flee. They shut down. They do not become creative. They don't come up with the kinds of solutions that you need to move forward in this new kind of environment. So there's really, and there's always the chance, you know, just like the person who's smoking and starting to cough and starting to have a sore throat, you know, that you can do that long enough, and sometime at some point you may have left it too late. You really may have gone on that way too long and there's no way to recover. So I'd like to explore this a little bit at the individual level first, because I think this will resonate with you maybe better than the organizational level. Let's take the issue of coronary bypass surgery. Looking at the web now, it appears that the cost of coronary bypass surgery is somewhere between $70,000 and $200,000 right now, depending on the complication of the operation. So the operation is not inexpensive. It's not uncomplicated. The recovery from it is not simple for the patient who goes through it. And on top of all of that, it's not a permanent solution, because the main thing that clogs people's arteries and causes heart disease are behaviors that people commit. And so if people have their arteries declogged but don't change their behavior, they're at risk for being right back there in surgery again. What are the 5 behaviors that are most likely to lead to being back in the operating room? Well, we have sloth and overeating, smoking, excessive stress, and drinking. So those are the 5 behaviors. IBM a few years ago had a conference where they called in experts. They wanted to think about technological solutions to the biggest problems in the world. They started with healthcare, because certainly healthcare is a whopping part of our GDP and rising. It's on the cover of Time magazine this week. So they start with healthcare, and they have the just retired CEO of the Johns Hopkins University Hospital come in to talk about, you know, technology and healthcare. And he comes in and he says the really big issues in healthcare are behavioral. It's not that technology can't help, but in this situation, he said 2 years after open heart surgery, he asked them to guess how many people had changed their behaviors so that they weren't at risk of coming back in for another surgery. 1 in 10. After going through all of that, only 1 in 10 people change these behaviors enough to stay out of the operating room again. That's a very personal situation. The costs of not changing are very personal. So it's really intriguing about why people can't or won't or don't change their behavior after that kind of a crisis. You know, what about organizations? The professors Jeff Pfeffer and Bob Sutton at Stanford University have done summaries of a number of major types of organizational changes that often are pursued as organizations are starting to go into a tailspin or a downslide. Things like mergers or acquisitions, downsizing employees, taking on total quality management, re-engineering, or reorganizing. And their estimate is that only about a third of those are really successes. There are probably about another third that eventually get done, but they come in way too late, way over budget, and some of them are unmitigated failures. For example, you know, the issue of employee downsizing, that's something that Wall Street applauds. You downsize employees, the stock price goes up in the short term, but over the long time, research shows that that's a harbinger of poorer future performance. So, you know, what has to happen? There was a very fascinating study done at Harvard University of what do newspapers do with the threat from online publishing. And they studied, qualitative study, very in-depth study of 8 newspapers and how they were responding to internet competition. The bottom line was 7 of the 8 did produce an internet product, but it was just a mimic of what they produced every day in the hard copy news. They never really got much revenue out of their web page. The only paper that really produced a substantially different product that was making money was one that had a lot of outside advisors and hired people to run it who were from outside the industry. And what they talked about was these newspapers, when they finally felt the threat, they threw money at the problem, but then they got rigidly controlling of the people who were supposed to implement the change. So they called it threat rigidity. It was this thing about when you get nervous, then you want to control everything and you end up becoming more like you always were. And so when you're in crisis, for a period of time, whether you're an individual or whether you're an organization, at some point, for change to go on in a positive way, fear needs to change to hope and ultimately to inspiration if an organization is going to succeed. So let's go back to the case of individuals. One of the most successful people at dealing with individuals with clogged arteries and heart disease has been Dean Ornish. So, you know, we had this history that I just told you where 1 out of 10 people after open heart surgery is motivated enough to change behavior. Well, Ornish felt that one of the problems was that people are eating, smoking, and drinking to cope with things like stress, depression, and loneliness. And he said, you know, people will do stuff because they're scared for a little while, but if you're lonely, stressed out, and depressed, the promise of, you know, living longer isn't all that exciting. And so he tried to pursue this through a positive vision of how much better life could be. This is what Alcoholics Anonymous does, too. The positive vision that people get from going to it of seeing how life can actually be better without alcohol. So it's a positive vision. Then he supplemented that, though, with a very clear plan. You know, people who've been struggling with weight loss or drinking or smoking for a long time, they need a plan. And so his plan was evidence-based, science-based. So first of all, he dealt with diet, eating the kinds of foods that aren't as likely to clog the arteries again. He also dealt with the spiritual, emotional, and social components that these people were going through. So his program has group sessions. We have them here at the University of Iowa in our wellness program. I've attended some of them. You have group sessions, you talk, you learn how to meditate, you learn how to do yoga, and you do some brainstorming about how to deal with the issues that you're having that are causing you to have stress or clogged arteries. And he did a trial with 333 people for a year. The trial was funded by Mutual of Omaha. 2 years after that trial was over, 77% of people were sticking with their new behaviors. Mutual of Omaha figured they saved $30,000 per patient. Now that's 20 years ago. That figure is probably at least $100,000 now. Okay, so let's move it up to a different level. Let's take Nelson Mandela in South Africa. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in prison as a political prisoner. He came out in 1990. There was a lot of pressure on South Africa from other countries to end apartheid. Very racially divided country, 41 million people, only 20% of them Caucasian. In 1994, Mandela was elected president of South Africa, and his vision was to get over this tremendous racial divide, and the image he had was one South Africa. And he came up with a plan to do this. The man here is Francois Pienaar. He was the captain of the rugby team in South Africa. The rugby team in South Africa at that time was not good enough to qualify for the Rugby World Cup. So Mandela said, no problem, let's work on this. We'll get the World Cup here. We'll get the World Cup here, and I want you, Francois, and your team to help us do well in this tournament, to unite this country through rugby around the idea of one South Africa. He took the rugby team to the prison where he had sat for 27 years. That was a very emotional experience that committed the team to want to help Mandela unite the country. Rugby was a very interesting symbol because it was the symbol of white South Africa. It's a very violent sport. It symbolized white violence and oppression to the black population of South Africa. And so this was when Nelson Mandela started wearing Springboks caps and Springboks jackets and said, we're one South Africa. He was asking a lot from his own people. But he did it. The team continued to win as the tournament went on, and in an incredibly dramatic victory, they won the World Rugby Cup in overtime. Here's one more from business, but it's the same theme of one IBM. Lou Gerstner took over IBM. IBM, when I used to teach at Cornell University, and when I went there in the early 80s, IBM was maybe the most revered company in the world, awfully close, if not the top. It was so highly regarded. But by 1993, everybody expected the company to be broken apart into pieces called the baby blues. No one wanted the job of overseeing this. They checked with the CEOs of Microsoft, Apple, Compaq, Sun, and Motorola. They all turned the job down. They finally got Lou Gerstner to take the job. Lou Gerstner was an old McKinsey consultant who had recently come from a tobacco and food company. Okay, so he wasn't in the industry at all. And he was expected to spin off parts of IBM, sell a lot of things, and then have the divisions operate as the baby bells. And then in the process, he started talking to customers who said, you know, we don't need another disk drive company. We don't need another PC company. We don't need another software company. What we actually need, what we have always looked to you to do, is to set up our whole system and services and tell us how to run the whole operation, run the whole IT. And so at that point, he decided that instead of spinning everything off, the company needed to stay together. That was where the future of its business was. He still didn't know exactly what the strategy or the plan were going to be, what it was that one IBM was going to do, but he knew he wanted to keep it as one IBM. Eventually, he settled on a strategy that was very heavily based on the internet, and part of the reason for that was that the employees inside IBM were really pushing this up to him and saying this is an exciting opportunity. The other was that he focused on services more than hardware. Now here's one company that changed its vision that was not in a crisis. This is Interface, the carpet company. They're the company that makes carpet tiles. You see them all over now, especially in public places like hotels, educational facilities. They're very environmentally sound and ecologically sound because if, for example, a guest spills red wine right in the middle of the rug, you just whip up that little 2-foot by 2-foot tile and replace it. You don't have to scrape up all the carpet, rip it all up, send it to a landfill. So any area that gets heavy traffic, any area that gets ruined, you just have to replace that small area. So this company was not in crisis. It had grown rapidly. It had companies in scores of countries. It was profitable. The product kept getting better. And they had this, but they did have a nagging problem, which is they had some active environmental groups in California who kept saying, what is Interface doing for the environment? You know, and saying Interface you just don't get it about the environment. And this really irked their CEO, Ray Anderson, because he was impeccable about following all the legislation about everything, including the environment. The company was impeccably up to speed in terms of environmental regulation. And so he assigned a task force to kind of deal with this issue and pretty much hoped that they would deal with the issue and leave him alone. And then he was approached by the head of the task force who said, you know, the task force, when we get started on this, we don't really have a very clear sense of your vision for this. What is your vision for this environmental task force? He didn't want to say he didn't have one. He had 1 month, and he was stewing over, what should my vision be? And someone handed him a book by Paul Hawken of Smith & Hawken called The Ecology of Commerce. And he took it and he started to read it. And at one point, he really got touched by an example of an island where too many reindeer were imported onto the island. They procreated, they prospered, they grew to thousands of animals, but the island was too small, and they came back a few years later, and there were 36 animals left and a lot of skeletons. And that was something that really struck him, and also Hawkins describing how much natural resource business was taking from the earth, natural resources that were not renewable, the way the things that reindeer were eating were renewable. And all of a sudden, he got very inspired. He said, you know, we're such an oil-intensive business, Carpet, that we might as well be considered an extension of the oil industry. He said, you know, if we can do something about this issue, then anyone can. And so he came up with something called Mission Zero. When he talked to that task force, he said, I want us to be the #1 name in global ecology. I don't want us to take 1 drop of fresh, new oil from the earth, and I only want to take things from the earth that are renewable. Now, that was a goal. That wasn't something you could do immediately, but that was his vision, and he called it Mission Zero. So if no one leads, who will follow? So you get visions, and then you have to communicate visions. Let's go back to Lou Gerstner for a minute. He got his vision of one IBM, and like the good McKinsey consultant that he had been, he was very good about deciding how many people had to be laid off, what real estate had to be sold, which businesses really had to be spun out. He hired a new financial officer. I mean, he was very, very businesslike in terms of stopping the bleeding at IBM. And he had the vision of one IBM, and they were working on the strategy and the plan. But he said, I realized all of a sudden this was not enough. I was dealing with a decimated culture. I was dealing with despondent people. They had gone from being one of the most admired companies in the world to being almost bankrupt in the space of about 10 years. And I had some really angry people because IBM was a company that prided itself on not laying people off. So when they really had to lay a lot of people off, there was a lot of feeling of betrayal on the parts of some of the employees. And so Lou Gerstner, who was really kind of a corner office, spreadsheet-loving man, realized that he had to become an inspirational leader. And so, against his kind of nature, he just willed himself to go out there and spend thousands of hours talking to the people in IBM about the one IBM and its great future. He said, I had to shake them out of their stupor. You're IBM, damn it. Okay? So here's another one. Here's a very different industry. Here's Stanley Mcchrystal. He was talking to Fast Company about his stint in Afghanistan. He said, we thought we knew the rules of the game we were playing, but the game we were playing was not at all good enough for the sport that we were finding in Afghanistan. And so he realized that they could not conduct their mission in Afghanistan unless he had a lot of information from the boots on the ground. This was not a war. War probably has never been well controlled by generals sitting up in England while your people are dying in France. But he realized that he really needed very good on-the-ground intelligence. He had a small number of unmanned aerial vehicles, but not enough to go around. Who got those vehicles was a very big issue because the commanders who had those vehicles felt more secure and more informed than those that didn't. So he invested very, very heavily in information technology so that they could have very frequent mandatory virtual meetings where the commanders themselves, the ones on the ground, decided who should get those unmanned vehicles, and where the people who had those vehicles then shared the information with the commanders who didn't. So he said, we really went from a very hierarchical organization to a networked organization. And he said, if I had ever brought up these ideas to the people I grew up with in the military, they would have beaten me up and taken my lunch. One more example of communicating a vision. This one is audio-visual. This is Leonard Bernstein. He's about to, for the first time, begin conducting a youth orchestra, people who've competed from all over the world to get into this youth orchestra and then be mentored by Leonard Bernstein. And so this is a very early run-through of The Rite of Spring, and you'll see him creating a vision for these young players. Oh, that did not work. Okay. Ooh, that could work.
I think you're all too well-mannered. You've been brought up too well. These dances are all performed by adolescents, so I guess a lot of you should know what I'm talking about. But think of that. Think of the times. I'm not just wasting words. All the times that we all experienced in adolescence, and I remember like yesterday, when you're lying on the ground and it's spring or summer, and you lie down face down on the ground and you want to kiss it. You watch the grass grow. You listen to the grass grow and you want it just to enfold you. You've all had that experience. You're lying near a tree trunk and you want to take it in your arms. Oh, that's what that down means, okay? So much talk.
Okay, so vision is partly about emotion. The importance of empowering leadership. This is a picture of Ray Anderson of Interface. What did he do with that task force right after he delivered his vision? He said, that's my vision. You have 2 days to sit and brainstorm how we're going to make it happen. And then I'll come back. You tell me how we're going to do it, and I'll support you. Let me show you the results of that in the first 12 years. These are improvements they made in waste. 78% reduction in landfill waste, 80% reduction in water use per unit of carpet, 71% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Anderson was very fond of pointing out that the United States had refused to join the Kyoto Protocol, which was asking for a mere 7% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And the amount of fossil fuel per unit was down 60%. This was happening while sales had increased by 67% and earnings had doubled. Anderson said that the sustainability project that he started was the most powerful thing that he had ever seen in business. He said the amount of goodwill and positive word of mouth that they got from that was better than any ad campaign ever could have been. He said he had no trouble attracting the very best engineers and the very best business school graduates. He said sometimes they would come up to him and say, "Ray, I never thought I'd be working for a carpet company," and they're just shocked that they not only took the job, but they stay. And he said they stay because they're not making carpet, they're making history. Another example of empowerment, Google's 20% time. There are other companies that have versions of this, but Google encourages, doesn't require, but encourages their employees to spend one day of their work week working on some project that they think is important, that personally inspires them. You may be interested to know that Gmail was an outcome of one of those passions. Google Sky was another outcome of one of those passions. And about a third of the people who are working on these projects right now at Google are working on innovations for nonprofits that they hope they can eventually scale up to the for-profit world also. But right now their heart is with the nonprofits. And so on the issue of, and what's so nice about this kind of a project is that what Google is letting people do is to use their unique skills and passions in a way that fulfills a vision and sort of uses the whole person. And this is where I think, and I'm very inspired by, the University of Iowa's engagement project. This is a word cloud that was developed by some of the people who are working very actively in the engagement project. The engagement project is an outreach program where university students and faculty go out into the state, into the community, into the schools. They give information to people, but they also get information back from communities, from high school students, from farmers, from business people. And the idea is that the intersection between us and the community will create new knowledge in both directions and perhaps advance science for the good of the community. And so here are just a couple of people. The list is endless of the ways that people have used their personal passions and their personal expertise to do this, but here are some of my favorites. Craig Just. Craig Just, who has done a tremendous amount in the science of water quality. He takes students on international trips every spring break to improve water quality in developing nations. He was at first inspired by a trip to Guatemala, where he was very touched by the poverty and the unsanitary conditions. He has a course called Design for the Developing World. In one of the early versions of that course, his students developed a water sanitizer that they perfected and put into a competition from the Environmental Protection Agency. They won a national award and $75,000, which they plowed back into more development for the developing world. We have Jerry Schnur, who takes students to conferences all over the globe on climate change, and who is working hard with people in the state of Iowa to make sure that as we have not just this recent drought, but a long-term decline in the amount of water in the reservoirs and aquifers of Iowa, that we will have enough water for future generations. Uday Kumar, who is one of the people who goes on the India Winterim project. I read about him developing solar cookers for India so that they don't have to cut down as many trees to cook their food. In the winter interim in India, we also do projects for environmentally sound and very inexpensive housing, improved health care, and teacher training. Dave Collins in our own College of Business, who works with the Yellowstone Association, often brings students out to Yellowstone to help with projects there. Last year they were involved in designing and marketing eco-tours so that people who come for tours to enjoy the beautiful flora, fauna, and mountains and trees at Yellowstone also are getting lectures that explain to them just how fragile that ecosystem is and what kinds of things need to be done to protect it. Then there's Terry Larsen, a person I never met. She's a realtor in Iowa City, but one morning I'm opening up my newspaper. I always read her opinion column. She's always seemed like such a nice, thoughtful, pro-social person. And I read her opinion piece, and I had a lump in my throat when I finished because I didn't know that Terry Larsen was an adjunct professor in the Tippie College of Business. She teaches in the Frank Communication Center. She teaches the business communication and protocol class. And as part of her class, she has her students create a personal code of ethics. So they create from inside of themselves, they dig into themselves and say, what is my personal code of ethics? And Terry teaches early in the morning, and I'm told that she often gets athletes in her class. So, you know, people who are athletes here, they have to work so hard to be athletes and to keep their grades up and to do both things. So they come into these classes, and here were some of the snippets from the codes of ethics that she wrote in the paper. One was a person who said when he went home now, he realized that everybody had considered him a bully. Although while he was growing up, he said, all I thought I was doing was defending myself. But now that I know that people thought I was a bully and that they were afraid of me, I'm always thinking about, is what I'm doing now creating harm? Am I harming anybody with what I'm doing? There was another one who said, I feel I have an imperative to protect the people closest to me and the people who are weak and innocent. I pledge to use my size and capabilities to protect those who can't protect themselves. There was another person who said, I will take ownership for my own mistakes. I won't allow others to suffer the blame or take the fall for my mistakes. On the contrary, I will give credit where credit is due. I'll be the first to congratulate other people on their accomplishments, and I will graciously accept constructive criticism and incorporate it into my work ethic. Then there's Linda Snetzlar and her colleagues in the Department of Epidemiology who win grants. No, it's hard work. They don't win them. They go through hard work to get grants to go out into the state of Iowa. We all know that we have health problems among the young, that they need nutritional advice, they need more exercise, and Linda and her colleagues are out there in the middle schools, the high schools, and the elementary schools getting people moving and eating better. We have Joyce Berg in the College of Business who for many years has worked with the Voluntary Income Tax Assistance Program along with students in the law school as well. These are the people who right now at this time of the year are out there providing help to people who don't know how to do their income taxes. There's Leslie Feiner, the director of Arts Share. She works with the students and teachers in the arts colleges here at the University of Iowa on many different outreach projects. I'll just mention two of them here. One that I like, the Shakespeare Project. She goes to high schools where people are being exposed, maybe for the first time, certainly early exposure to Shakespeare. They come in, they help the students unpack the language of whatever they're reading. They set a context, the period of the times, and then when they're done, they do some popular act from Shakespeare. One that goes over well, I guess, in high schools is Romeo and Juliet. So they stay and do Romeo and Juliet. Another one, the Patient Voice Project. This matches up people from the Iowa Writers Workshop with patients with long-term disabilities and help those patients to write their stories. This is an effort that's been copied in other health care institutions, including the Mayo Clinic. And the last one I'll mention, David Gold, the Associate Director for Student Development. He's done many outreach things in his time here at Iowa. The most recent, though, he is collaborating with Tony Hsieh, the CEO of Zappos, on their project to make downtown Las Vegas a place that forward-thinking, high-tech, positive, optimistic, fun-loving people will want to call Vegas their home. And who have they chosen to partner with them in this effort but students from the University of Iowa because of David Gold. I think that's just wonderful. So they're all headed there for spring break. Okay. An open, honest culture. Here are 3 people who didn't live in an open, honest culture. They lived in cultures that shot the messenger. In the top left corner, Daniel Ellsberg, who exposed the Pentagon Papers and brought finally the Vietnam War to a faster end than it otherwise might have gotten. We have Sharon Watkins, who went to Kenny Lay 5 months before Enron imploded, telling him about the accounting irregularities. And in the other corner, we have Sean Carpenter, who worked for Sandia Labs, who discovered wide-scale Chinese cyber espionage against numerous federal government agencies, and was told by his superiors at Sandia not to tell anybody. It wasn't his business. They only cared about Sandia. He reported it to the feds and was fired. So for organizations to survive now in this environment, you cannot survive by keeping out bad information. If you don't really know what's going on, you are not going to survive in this world. And so here's Lou Gerstner, for example. One of the things he did in communicating when he took over was he let people know his expectations of them. And one of his biggest expectations was that he wanted not to be surprised. He wanted frank conversations. He wanted to know the bad news. And he said, I like people who solve problems. I sack people who are politicians. Those of you who've seen the movie Lincoln, think about the great extent that Lincoln went to in his passion to pass the 13th Amendment. He wanted every scrap of information he could get about who was likely to vote, how, why, and what it was going to take to turn the votes that he needed to turn in a favorable direction. This is a great example of a person who was constantly monitoring the environment because he wanted to know the truth, because he had a purpose, he had a passion, he had a mission in mind, and he wasn't going to just listen to people. And this is a problem for CEOs. They're often surrounded by people who want to flatter the CEO. And so you actually have to take pains not to be lied to. Nate Silver, the person who has such a great record in predicting presidential elections, he did that in a variety of ways by focusing on the electoral vote and not just the popular vote. But the main thing he says in his book is it's impossible to be totally objective about data and analytics. We all have a bias toward letting in the information we want to hear, analyzing things in the way we want them to come out. And so the best thing that you can do with that is to collect a lot of data and to build in steps to try to protect against your biases. The things I've been talking about to this point, there's a lot of empirical evidence that it's these things about companies, the things I've been talking about to this point, really do have predictability for company success. So the Gallup organization has been doing decades of research inside organizations. They surveyed more than 80,000 people to develop something called the Gallup Work Audit. 12 questions. I'll read you just a few of them you'll recognize from my talk. People say, I have a supervisor or someone who cares about me as a person at work. I have someone who encourages my development at work. I have a best friend at work. The mission or purpose of my company make me feel my job is important. Coworkers are committed to quality work. I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day. My opinions count at work. So after collecting all these data, they worked with Frank Schmidt here of the University of Iowa, and he went in and took databases from more than 400 companies encompassing thousands of business units, and he put all those data together from those units and he put them into a big meta-analysis and showed definitively that when people respond to those questions in a positive way, their business units have higher customer satisfaction and loyalty, higher productivity, and greater profitability, and that the effects are substantial. Companies of the future have to be ambidextrous, and by that I mean they have to both be they have to have operations that are reliable and efficient, but at the same time they have to have a different set of skills that allow them to be creative and innovative. Let me give you some quick examples. Back to interface again. What Ray Anderson said was, waste is the engine that will drive the whole train. So the first thing Interface did was to cut waste out of carpeting, cut waste in water, cut waste in transportation, and they saved $405 million in the early years, which they then applied to innovation and new plant, new vehicles, wind energy, solar energy, even taking methane out of landfills for energy. Okay? So on the creativity side, with this new money and the successes they'd already achieved, they took up on the project of biomimicry, basically looking to nature. We have 3.8 billion years of evolution, so let's go look to nature. How does nature do things? So this carpet here is called Entropy. It's modeled after the carpeted floor of a forest. Okay? And so it's done so that the tile can be laid in any direction, it doesn't matter. The dialots don't have to match perfectly as if it were a single color. So it's a very easy tile to replace and to mix and to not have to worry so much about dialots. They also were very concerned about how much glue goes under carpet. There's a lot of chemicals in the glue. There's a lot of waste. It creates a lot of labor to lay down and to peel it up. And so they were looking for some way to put the tiles together so they'd just float on the floor and have little tabs between them. And so what did they do? They studied the gecko. They studied what it is that allows the gecko to climb up a wall or hang from a ceiling. And they discovered it was the van der Waals force. And don't press me very much on what that is. But they used it, and now they have these teeny tiny tabs between their carpet tiles. This is IDEO, a company that's won many design awards. You may have seen a show they did on ABC Nightline called The Deep Dive, where they designed a revolutionary shopping cart. Their slogan, or their saying is, it doesn't matter whether you ask us to design a tractor or a toothbrush, the process we use is the same. So a highly efficient process to produce incredibly creative products that are human-centered. And so, for example, in this shop, and here's what they do. They assemble a team of very diverse, functionally diverse people. So they might have a psychologist, they might have an anthropologist, they might have an industrial engineer, they might have a safety person. And so for the cart, they would decide, well, what are the main features? It has to be flexible, maneuverable, has to be safe because people put their kids in them. It has to accommodate the way shopper likes to move. We'd like to ensure that they don't get stolen and taken, out of the shopping lot. And so they basically assemble this team. They have a skilled facilitator who will know whether something's going out of control on the team. They conduct a lot of fast prototypes, see what's working, see what isn't, eliminate bad prospects, and have very strict time limits, and then produce these products that are completely revolutionary. Okay. A slightly grander scale of being ambidextrous. New business models, there are many new business models. I could talk hours about them. Networked organizations, virtual organizations, self-organized organizations like Wikipedia or Flickr, or organizations that compete with others in some areas but partner with them in others, lots of different new business forms. What I want to focus on here is, toward the end, is business models that are attempting to seriously solve some of the major problems in the world. So they're trying to combine the benefits, the good parts of business, the efficiency, the reliability, the ability to sense a market with the problems of the world, such as the fact that 2.5 billion people in the world live on less than $2 a day, the fact that there are 70 million children who are not going to school, the fact that, and this fact comes not from Al Gore, but from a Coca-Cola executive, that 12 years from now, 2/3 of the world's people will be water insecure. If you go on I-80 to Adair County, you can see some pillars that will show you visually that in the state of Iowa since 1850, we've already lost half of our topsoil. If you look at statistics about rainforests and the ecosystems, the University of Michigan is estimating that 50% of them are already gone, and most of that occurred since 1990. Okay, so these are real problems in the world, and I want to talk about, just give a few examples of organizations that are merging the business ethic with the problems of the world and with a compassionate ethic. So here we have Muhammad Yunus, the founder of the Grameen Bank, winner of the 1996 Nobel Peace Prize, or 1996, excuse me. This is, when we think of the poor, we usually think about charity. This is a very different idea. This is not let's give charity to the poor. This is let's lend to the poor. Let's lend money not to the rich, but let's lend money to people without any collateral. Another way in which this was a new business model was after research showed that women were far more likely to spend money in ways that would enhance their families and their communities. 98% of the loans went to women instead of men. And it relies on group mentoring and group peer pressure, because if one person in the group defaults, the whole group suffers. So a very unconventional model for dealing with poverty. Here's Blake Mycoskie, the founder of Tom's Shoes. He calls it a one-for-one model. He was very touched by poverty in Argentina. In talking to people in Argentina, saw that there were many barefoot children, found out that this not only caused disease, but often kept them out of schools. So he was a serial entrepreneur. He sold one of his businesses to found Tom's Shoes. So now every time you buy a pair of Tom's Shoes, he gives away one pair to a child, an impoverished child in another country. And he's done a lot of research to figure out in which countries of the world is it the biggest handicap to be shoeless. This is one, Pearson, the education company. Its motto is always learning. Pearson has long had a charitable foundation arm to try to bring technological advances to education and to bring education to people who otherwise can't afford it or have access to it. But now they're also applying a business model in education in Africa, South America, and India after discovering that entrepreneurial private sector, for-profit education is exploding in ghettos. Okay, so, and why is that happening? Because parents feel they can't get a good public education in those areas, so they're scraping together whatever they can because they see education as their children's future. And so Pearson is now partnering. This is a school in Ghana, the Omega Schools. They're partnering here. It's a very low-cost school. Parents pay by the day because they can't come up with a year's tuition all at once. They're given 15 grace days in case something comes up. Their kids don't have to drop out of school. It's a total program where the children are not only educated, but they're fed, and their health care needs are taken care of. And it's based on a very carefully tracked model of teacher training, of measuring student results, and tracking individual student progress. Here's a local example, an example of a nonprofit. I'm on the board of Shelter House. It's a very well-run nonprofit. Nonprofits are, just last week, I think in the Des Moines paper I read that nonprofits are really struggling, partly because with all the need now, the number of nonprofits has proliferated. So we have many, many nonprofits all competing to service the same or similar needs. So there's a lot of need for them to coordinate with one another, a tremendous need for business skills to become efficient, reliable. And at Shelter House, I've just seen tremendous development there in strategic planning, in budget development, And now the latest, entrepreneurialism. You know, they're great fundraisers at Shelter House. They have a great model for how to help the homeless. It's not just the roof over the head, it's developing them to have a whole life of if possible, gainful employment. But they realize that just grant writing and charity, they can't rely simply on that. They have clients, they're trying to get them gainfully employed, but some of them have mental illness issues. Some of them have a criminal record, have a hard time getting a job. So they've become entrepreneurial. They have 2 businesses now, and I'm sure they're going to have more. Culinary Starts, a catering and food service business, and Fresh Starts, a janitorial service. So, okay, almost done. As I draw this to a close, I would like you to leave you with an overall feeling of what it's like when it all comes together, when an organization has a noble purpose, when it has empowering leaders who co-create a vision with their employees that everybody's buying into, and the organization is open to input, open to the world, and wants to know the truth so that it can improve its mission. So the first is a quote from Jim Collins' book, From Good to Great, about companies that for at least 15 years outperformed the market by at least 3.5 times. Here's a quote about the CEO of Gillette over that time period. When Coleman Mockler died and we all went to the funeral, I looked around and realized how much love was in the room. This was a man who spent nearly all his working hours with people who loved him, who loved what they were doing, and who loved one another, at work, at home, in his charitable work, whatever. I've told you about Lou Gerstner. I've said that some people called him a little bit kind of edgy. He wasn't really a people person. He had forced himself to get out there. He said he knew he was brought there to break up the company, and then he did hear the customers say, you know, that's not really what we want. But he also told Jim Collins that another reason he kept IBM together and took the route that he did, he said, an unexpected thing happened. I just fell in love with the company. And then, since I've watched Lincoln, I've become obsessed with Daniel Day-Lewis interviews. And here are 2 quotes from Daniel Day-Lewis about playing Lincoln. He said, the more that we read about him in preparation for the movie, the more we all fell in love with him. And then he also said, I have never, ever felt that depth of love for someone I never met. Okay, so I'd like to leave you once again with a multi-sensory experience of what it's like when all of this comes together, what a resilient organization feels like. Will eyebrows ever look the same? And so my hope here is that if you are now leading an organization, working in an organization, or volunteering in an organization, I really hope that you've been able to find a place that feels like this and has these characteristics. If you're in college now and you're going to be looking for a job, I hope you have a sense now of what it is you should be looking for that will create a higher sense of purpose that will allow you to really get in with the vision of the organization and feel like a whole person when you're working there. And then finally, if you're in an organization that doesn't feel at all like that, and you know, then I hope that you can use some of this to help change that organization, or if you just don't see a way to do that, that you can start thinking about finding an organization that tugs on your heartstrings and has a higher purpose. So thank you very much.